Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the Full Employment and Balanced Growth Act of 1978, the Joint Economic Committee provides analysis and recommendations about the goals and policies set forth in the economic report of the President. And this is to assist the House in its consideration of the budget resolution. During the next hour, the members of the Joint Economic Committee will answer two questions. Why has this economic recovery been so weak when compared with past recoveries? And secondly, how would a gradual reduction of federal spending relative to the size of America's economy, as envisioned in the House Republican budget resolution, how would this help hardworking Americans by accelerating economic growth, job creation, and real wage increases? Regrettably, our economy remains stuck in second gear. Last year, real GDP, in other words, apples-to-apples economy, grew by a mere 2.37%. That's an imperceptible increase over the average annual growth rate of 2.3% during the entire recovery. Although conditions have improved, the Obama recovery remains the weakest or near the bottom in terms of every major measurement of economic performance compared with other recoveries of the past half a century. The Joint Economic Committee describes the differences in economic performance in this recovery and with the average of other recoveries since 1960 as the growth gap. And this growth gap is real. Since the recession ended, the economy has grown by 13.5%, compared with the average growth of over 24% during other recoveries. This growth gap means our economy is currently missing $1.5 trillion, a hole comparable in size to the economy of Australia or Mexico or Spain. Since the recession ended, private sector payrolls, that is Main Street jobs, increased by 10%, but over the average of other recoveries, it was more than 15%. Thus, from the end of the recession, the growth gap in Main Street jobs is a staggering 5.5 million jobs. America is missing 5.5 million jobs, enough to hire everyone looking for work in 45 states. Not surprisingly, hardworking American families have felt the adverse effects of slow growth and lagging job creation in their pockets. Since the recession ended, real after-tax income per person has increased by a total of merely 7%, 7.1 to be exact. In other recoveries, it was over 15%. Thus, the growth gap in real after-tax income equates to nearly $3,000 per person. It's $2,915. So what that means for a family of four in America, they're missing $11,000 a year from their family budget. Ironically, for a president that obsesses with income inequality and promotes middle-class economics, the White House has presided over a disappointing recovery that has bestowed most of its benefits to the wealthy and the well-connected, while families and businesses on Main Street continue to suffer from a very disappointing recovery. The S&P Total Return Index, adjusted for inflation, meaning Wall Street, has increased by 125.4% since the end of the recession. So Wall Street is roaring. Main Street and hardworking taxpayers are suffering. Closing the growth gap in the economy and jobs and paychecks will be very hard for this president to achieve with his current slow growth policies. While the economy has improved month after month, in truth, it has gone so slow. It is like bragging that your car has run for 63 straight months, but it only is running at 5 miles an hour. Well, that's what our economy is doing. And to catch up from these slow growth policies, merely to break even with the average performance of other recoveries, by the time President Obama leaves the White House, our economy will have to grow at an annual rate of 7.4% in the next 8 quarters. This is triple the growth rate in the Obama recovery. Private sector jobs, Main Street jobs in effect, would have to generate 403,000 jobs every month for the next 22 months. So this is well above the average of the disappointing Obama recovery of 100,000 jobs, especially in the last 6 months. Real after-tax income for every person in America, that is what their real disposable income in, would have to grow at an annual rate of 6.3% through the rest of President Obama's term. This is more than 4 times faster than what it's been doing during the Obama recovery. So why has our economy been so weak? Why has the Obama recovery been nearly dead last in all of these areas? First, federal spending is out of control. Albert Einstein defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over again, yet expecting different results. Is this not the perfect description of President Obama's budget? His budget reflects his dogmatic commitment to failed Keynesian economic policies, notwithstanding the overwhelming evidence that we are mired in the worst economic recovery of the last 50 years, creating this large and persistent growth gap. From the failed stimulus through Obamacare to demands for more federal infrastructure projects, President Obama's thirst for new spending has never slackened. Like a basketball team that cannot make halftime adjustments, this president refuses to learn from his failures. His budget would increase federal spending next year by another $74 billion and by another $300+ billion over the next 5 years. As this president is taking more in tax dollars from every American than almost at any time in history. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. If you look at this chart, you can see where per person revenue in America through the federal government, nearly the highest it's been, frankly, in the last 30 to 40 years. Fortunately, a Republican House has successfully applied the brakes to this spending, preventing a far worse economic mess. Secondly, our tax system is broken. For businesses, America has the highest corporate income tax rate among developed countries, and we're the only one in our global competitors with a system that taxes you here, taxes you abroad, and punishes you if you bring your profits back to invest in America. This puts American companies and their workers at a huge disadvantage with foreign competitors. For individuals here in America, our income tax system is so complex that 90% of taxpayers need to use a paid preparer or tax software. And families can't possibly keep up with the 4,000 changes in the tax law that occurred over the last decade. That's one new tax change every day of the year. And thirdly, President Obama has greatly expanded the regulatory burden, red tape, on American businesses and families during and after a severe recession. For example, the Affordable Care Act has imposed enormous new burdens on America's families, on our local businesses and health care providers. 4.5 years after enactment of financial regulations, regulators still haven't completed writing more than 40% of the new rules required under the Dodd-Frank Act. Meanwhile, our local bankers and local businesses have not been able to finance growth in their communities as a result of these regulations. President Obama has slow-walked the development of oil and natural gas on federal lands and waters and stubbornly vetoed the job creation XL pipeline. Most recently, President Obama's Federal Communications Commission went back in time, imposed a 1930-style regulation designed to control a telephone monopoly and now applied to the highly competitive Internet. Fourth, President Obama greatly expanded social welfare benefits during and after the severe recession. During the 1960s, Democratic President John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson knew that America's economy needed to be strong in order to afford the Medicare, Medicaid, and food stamp programs they favored. Both presidents insisted that Congress enact an investment tax credit and across-the-board reduction in income tax rates to put our economy into high gear before enacting new entitlement programs. Instead, President Obama did the opposite. Rammed Obamacare through a divided and controversial late-night maneuver, rammed through a large expansion of food stamps, extended unemployment benefits to a Democrat-controlled Congress before our economy had fully recovered. His entitlement expansion has reduced labor force participation. In other words, it has held back those who want to be in the workforce. According to University of Chicago economist Casey Mulligan, Obamacare alone will by 2017 cause roughly a 3% reduction in weekly employment, 3% fewer total hours worked, and a 2% reduction in labor income. So, less jobs, less hours worked, less in your paycheck. Taken together, President Obama's economic policies have increased the cost of doing business now and heightened uncertainty about the future. This is the opposite of what economically successful presidents such as John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan did. The Republican budget recognizes the Obama recovery is disappointing for Republicans, for Democrats, for independents, for college graduates, for middle-class, hardworking Americans. The Republican budget, which is a balanced budget for a stronger America, will give us a healthier economy. And, Mr. Speaker, with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserve.